Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joyce Taylor, and this is King 5 Plus, and we are about to bring you live a news conference presenting what is called the Safer School Strategy by the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. School safety is critical to overall safety. That's according to prosecutors, who are going to lay out specifics on a plan to make our schools safer. We are going to hear from Lisa Mannion, King County's prosecuting attorney, from Jamie Vistad, the Assistant Chief of Juvenile Division for King County, and also Diane Chen, Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. So we expect to get some new data showing that student firearm charges are going up, even as gun violence is falling overall. What are the new tools? We are about to find out, but we do know they include civil risk protection orders, stronger school threat assessments, and much, much more. That news conference getting underway right now. Let's take it live.
It is in conjunction with the UW and the Executive's Office. We have Marcus Stubblefield, we have Deontay Damper. We have a practicum student who has been working with the UW, Susan Seabrooks, and we have Dr. Monica Vavalala from the UW. So appreciate everyone being here. One of the things that was really important to us as we worked on the Safer School Strategy is that we weren't just going to be working with schools and community partners. We also really wanted to work with as many subject matter experts as we could. And it's been really helpful for them to advise us and help us come up with strategies as we look to work more closely with schools and support schools in our community. So I'll let Diana introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Diana Chen. I am a Senior Deputy Prosecutor here in the King County Prosecutor's Office. I have experience first as a prosecutor in Pierce County before coming over to King County, which is the county that I live in and was born and raised in this community. And I've handled cases ranging from misdemeanor crimes to child abuse and sexual assault crimes, and then I landed here in the Juvenile Division where I'm leading up the Safer School Strategies now and working closely with school districts and school leaders to see how we can improve juvenile crime and school safety in our community's school buildings. I'm also a member of the Strategic Plan Stakeholder Advisory Task Force for the Seattle Public Schools because I'm a parent of a young child in Seattle Public Schools, and so this is a subject matter that's very near and dear to me. Thank you.
All right, so a little bit about our approach. We recognize that in King County, we have a number of school districts. A lot of the districts vary in the way they are structured, in what their safety teams look like, in their size, and how they communicate within their district. One of the most fundamental things that we first did when we were structuring this strategy was we made sure that we knew who the safety contact was in each of the districts for the district office. We communicated with them and we made sure that when we had notifications, when we had emergent situations, we knew how to reach them and they knew how to reach us. So a little bit more about working with our schools. Washington State has a compulsory attendance law, so essentially students need to be in school until they're 18. There are exceptions once a student has reached age 16 where they can be in a credit retrieval or a GED program. But essentially it's a compulsory attendance law. And each school district has developed education re-engagement representatives. So these are essentially personnel administrators in each of the districts that works with families and with students once they start accumulating absences or tardies to help them with a re-engagement and attendance plan. It can involve a lot of different pieces, so it can provide transportation support, different scheduling options, maybe a relocation to a different school. There's also ability, again, for students to sometimes be online, work in a GED or a credit retrieval program, different options. One of the things that Diana and I really noticed in terms of a lot of our work is that a number of our current respondents in our juvenile system may have IEPs or 504 plans, so this was another piece that essentially needed to be sort of understood and accommodated when we were talking about attendance for these respondents in our courts. Some of the things that I think we have, again, really understood and recognized as important as what our schools offer our children are all the different sort of enrichment and social opportunities. And particularly for some of our respondents who are very high-risk children in need of more protective factors rather than less, we sort of recognize that as much as we can do to support these protective factors in the environment at school, in the environment when they come into court, we can reinforce them and we can strengthen them. So that's been a lot of what we've tried to do. I'm going to give you all a little snapshot of where we are at right now in terms of the juvenile division and our case breakdown. So you can see we looked at our years from 2021 to 2025. So right now, I think we are about on track to be the same amount of filings as the previous year, but if you notice, we have a different breakdown in that I think we have a smaller percentage of our more serious felonies, which are our Class A felonies, and a higher percentage of our Class B felonies, as well as our misdemeanors. So it just gives you a snapshot of where we're at, something that Diana and I are sort of always looking at when we're thinking about ways to work with and re-engage the respondents that are on our cases. And so now a focus on each intervention at the student, school district, and statewide level is really what we developed the Safer School strategy for. So this strategy launched in January of 2024. Back at that time, we were really starting to see children return to school in a more systematic way after COVID. We had experienced, unfortunately, with the return of children to school, the phenomenon of school shootings happening again, which I think as a parent, as much as the COVID years were really hard, it was also refreshing not to see those headlines, which are always pretty devastating. Our office actually came together, I remember it, after the Uvalde shooting, and we met with our ERPO team, with pretty much, I think, a lot of our chiefs, and everyone just sort of talked about any interventions or supports that we could do, and a lot of different ideas were thrown around. For the juvenile division, one of the things that we really leaned into was the Safer School strategy. So essentially really increasing communication between our prosecutors and all of the schools, helping to strengthen that connection again with probation. Again, when all of the children left school buildings, probation officers stopped going to schools. That was another connection point for them to get in touch with children. So we really kind of work to be that nexus for all of the different systems, recognizing that, systems don't talk to each other, people talk to each other. And then we stepped back and we really looked at what it looks like to be involved at a district level with each district. So we are participating in threat assessment trainings with district personnel. We are sitting on threat assessment boards when they ask us. We are also participating in any sort of trainings that are offered through the educational service districts to really understand and support this work. And then we're working at a very statewide level as well. All right, so here is our graphic about the Safer School Strategy. Again, just kind of highlighting that we're working very much at an individual student level, and then we're graduating out to more of that district approach, and then finally the statewide level. Again, a lot of the things that we've noticed that have really reinforced the purpose behind the Safer School Strategy is, again, really the recognition of what an important protective factor schools are. And really an acknowledgement that a lot of children go to school for a variety of reasons. School is a place where they meet peers, they have mentors, they have teachers, all of these really important facets. So the Safer School Strategy really wanted to work at a very micro to macro level and support that work.
So I want to give an overview of what type of cases we're typically seeing in juvenile court. They could be anything from possession of dangerous weapons at school, possession of firearms, especially is a recurring charge that we're seeing in juvenile court. Many of our juveniles are charged with robberies, either with a weapon or without a weapon, some sort of stolen vehicle crimes, often including attempt to eludes and very dangerous, serious driving. And so these are the types of cases that we're seeing. And when we get cases in the juvenile court system, the number one thing that we're asking is, what is the need that has been unmet by this juvenile, and what has led them into this setting where they've now committed harm against a person or the community, and how can we intervene as a system to provide whatever lessons, skills, or resources they were lacking in the hopes of rehabilitating them and diverting them from future contact with the system. So next slide. One thing that we've realized is that school is one of the most important protective factors when it comes to keeping kids safe and keeping them from either committing crimes and also being victims of crimes. Because what we also see in our work is, unfortunately, a lot of our kids who come into the juvenile justice system have also been victimized at some point in their life, and what they're in need of is support services and really like wraparound community support in order to be able to learn from that and move on in a productive way. So what we're trying to focus on in the prosecutor's office is really pushing attendance and engagement with schools. One of the things that we've done to make sure that we're getting ahead of this on the front end is screening kids early on to make sure that they are enrolled in schools and that they're consistently attending schools. And so that's in practice, us reaching out to the probation counselor, asking for them to confirm school attendance. When we're having in-court hearings, we're asking to have the juvenile and their attorney confirm where they're enrolled at and that they're actually attending schools. And then the juvenile probation counselor follows up with the schools to get attendance records and check in to make sure that the juvenile is being accountable for actually showing up at school and attending classes. I just in my own caseload, I recently did a review of the cases that I have, and I counted out of sampling of 55 kids that have active cases with me. 39 of those kids had a social history that reported some form of interrupted attendance at some point before entering into the juvenile justice system. So that's around 70% of the 55 active cases that I have. And that, to me, shows that the lack of support that they're receiving by not attending school is something that needs to be addressed. We also, in looking at my numbers, 17 of those 55 students had reported suspensions. So that's about 30% of these kids have actually had formal school discipline against them. And from those 55 kids, 11 of them reported having IEP plans, individualized education plans. So that's about 20% of those 55 active cases. Next slide. And so in order to combat chronic absenteeism, we need to figure out how can we get these kids to actually feel motivated to go to school. And can we identify the barriers that they're facing that make them disinterested or unable to attend school on a regular basis? As you can see from this visual here, there are a lot of additional co-occurring issues that can come either from or occur at the same time as chronic absenteeism. One of the other things that we're doing in juvenile court is trying to screen kids early on for behavioral health or substance use needs. That's something that was really astounding to me when I started doing this work, is figuring out that the vast majority of our kids have some sort of diagnosed or undiagnosed behavioral health disability or substance use disability. And a lot of them are just not receiving in the community the support that they really need and deserve. So we're screening that on a lot earlier than we have in the past. The approach in the past to juvenile justice has been having the case referred, go through the criminal court system, and we only impose conditions after an adjudication has been dealt, meaning that the juvenile has been found guilty of the crime. And it's not compulsory when the case is still pending, but we're availing these kids of services much earlier on and really pushing that community connection and community support at a much earlier stage than we as prosecutors have in the past. And so, as we'll talk about a little bit later, we're starting to see a little bit of a different approach to how we are responding to juvenile crimes and actually treating the root causes of what brings them to the doorstep of the juvenile justice system.
So this is some school absence data from OSPI, which I think is pretty helpful. Shows the last reported school year, which 2023 to 2024. Washington State in the previous school year, 2022 to 2023, we ranked 9th nationally for chronic absenteeism. Approximately 30% of students missing more than 10% of school days. So that was about double the pre-pandemic rate and higher than the national average of about 25%. So for the 2023 to 2024 school year, chronic absenteeism in Washington decreased slightly to 27%. Still higher than the 15% national average observed before the pandemic. So I think, what this data sort of shows me is that, again, we're starting to see more normalized school attendance, and I think also a recognition of how important it is. I think this idea of culture of attendance, reinforcing it with our children is starting to really, get leverage. There has been discussion at the legislature level about truancy. We currently have a BECA law, again, that requires compulsory attendance. I'm sure many people remember truancy courts of the past and a lot of the interventions that they did. Certainly, I think there's been a move to shift away from truancy petitions more to community engagement boards, to more early intervention supports. So again, we want to be reinforcing all of those efforts. We want to be working with the current King County BECA team, any community engagement board teams, and those re-engagement specialists to support all of those interventions. The next slide I have shows a little bit more about OSP data for 2023, 2024, showing a breakdown by race and ethnicity, which I also think is helpful to see. So with all of this data in mind, next slide please. One of the things that we really wanted to do was dig a little bit deeper into the data and understand what it showed us in terms of prevention and intervention, qualitative and quantitative data. And I say that slide, I added that line to that slide because we read, anytime a child comes in and is booked into juvenile detention, we read their screening notes. And they are a pretty comprehensive social history for us. They tell us a lot about what is happening with the child, where they are living, what their current crisis is, and it tells us about their school. And I can tell you, anecdotally, that every time I read one of those notes, it never says this child, is flourishing in school, attending regularly and receiving great grades. It doesn't say that. Like, there's always something happening at school. And so reflecting on that, we decided again to really look at that nexus between serious crime and school enrollment so that we could understand these patterns. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this is some data we looked at from the previous school year. And we shared out this data in our last media lunch and learn. And we specifically shared out the table at the end with the unlawful possession of a firearm in the second degree. We looked at 57 youth, 53 of them were school aged. We looked at their enrollment, 91% were enrolled, 9% weren't enrolled, and then we saw 85% who had this pattern of interrupted enrollment. So at some point in time, they had been unenrolled, they had stopped attending regularly, they had this pattern of interrupted enrollment. We also looked at more serious crimes, but I think one of the challenges for us was the recognition that with those serious crimes likely comes longer stays in detention or JR. So it was harder for us to really kind of understand that nexus between whether or not the school disengagement was really affecting these children committing crimes involving felonies. That being said, if you could go to the next slide, Douglas. So this is the slide that this is our recent slide from our youth this year, or from January to July of 2024, so our most recent school year. Actually, I apologize, I misspoke. So this slide is the UFA data, the unlawful possession of a firearm data that I just cited. If you could go to the next slide, Douglas. This is our current study. So this is from January to July of 2025. So again, we looked at about 51 juveniles, and we really wanted to isolate them. So we tried to pull only juveniles that had an unlawful possession of a firearm charge. We did not want to pull anyone who had a more serious charge that might be resulting in a stay at a juvenile rehabilitation facility or detention for a long time. We really wanted to kind of isolate that variable as much as we could. And we worked with our BECA team to look at that data. And essentially, we broke it down to 29% had interrupted enrollment. We had about 22% that had no enrollment, so over half. We had 49% that were enrolled and their attendance were unknown. So we suspected that they also had interrupted enrollment. We just didn't have the data because of different school districts and the current CEDARS database to really dive into that. But it still showed us that a significant proportion, over 50% of those kids, again, just weren't in school. So kind of, again, reinforced to us that this was a protective factor that we really wanted to support as much as possible in terms of an intervention. And again, we wanted to do that as early as possible.
So I talked a little bit already about the individual interventions that we're doing at the prosecuting level for juveniles who come into the juvenile justice system. And the slide on the TV shows generally the various things that are at play once an arraignment occurs. We're doing things like school safety planning and threat assessment, determining what conditions of release a juvenile should be placed on, if any, based on the crime, the circumstances, the facts of the case, and their prior history. So that could be anything from secure detention here at the CCFJC, an alternative to secure detention by electronic home monitoring, which essentially limits the juvenile to being within a specific geographic range during certain times of the day. And that alternative to secure detention does allow for them to still attend their assigned school during the proper school hours. One other thing about juvenile detention is there is a school facility here in the CCFJC, so the students who are in secure detention currently are receiving educational instruction on a daily basis. And then it could also be that based on their lack of criminal history, they are released without electronic home monitoring, but on conditions. And these conditions apply for all kids, regardless of whether they're released on EHM or without EHM. And that, first and foremost, is that they attend school and have no unexcused absences or tardies, that they're following home rules and living in an approved residence, approved by their guardian and by their juvenile probation counselor, and then maintaining law-abiding behavior. For weapons charges, that could would also include a prohibition from possessing weapons and guns, or for driving charges, a prohibition from driving a motor vehicle. And then what I mentioned previously, outside of court, we are working with the juvenile probation counselors and defense attorneys to come up with a plan of how to proceed on the individual case. So there are certain things that we're tracking, such as school enrollment and the results of any evaluations if a juvenile consents to doing it during the pretrial stage, and then connecting them with community resources in order to receive treatment in the community. We're also interfacing with schools, and we'll go to the next slide, by connecting with administrators at the school level much earlier on in the process. The juvenile probation counselors act as the go-between, the courts and the schools in verifying school attendance. And then also coming up with a consistent school safety plan that aligns with the court's conditions. All right, and then we'll go to the next slide. So this talks a little bit more about the school safety plan. So in Washington State, it's mandated that when an incident occurs at school, the building level administration will come up with a threat assessment and then implement a school safety plan in order to respond to the identified threat. Each district is required to come up with their own policy and procedure for that. What we have found in our experience working with schools in King County is that each district, while they have their own threat assessment and safety plan procedure, each district implements it in different ways. And so what this means is that we're getting different results based on the school district or even the specific school within a district. So the measures that we're taking to connect earlier on with schools involves providing additional information to schools to better inform them about how they may come up with their school safety plan. So next slide, Douglas. Another aspect of Washington law is that after a plea of guilt or an adjudication, it's compulsory that the school that the juvenile attends is notified of the plea of guilt for certain types of crimes. Those would be violent offenses, sex offenses, firearm offenses and drug offenses in a nutshell. But with the Safer School Strategy plan, we started being more proactive on connecting with schools and giving notifications on pending firearms cases, and to our discretion, additional types of charges. But this means that even if an incident occurs outside of school grounds, we are notifying schools of the fact that one of their students has been charged with a firearm-related offense, so that they're aware of the threat and able to come up with appropriate interventions at the school level to make sure that their school community is safe, that the individual juvenile is safe, and that they can implement strategies for positive behavior intervention. Next slide. And so to date, since we began the Safer School Strategy program, the King County Prosecutor's Office has made over 200 school notifications since August of 2023. That's roughly 100 notifications per year. Next slide.
And this is felony firearm cases.
Oh, yes,
pending.
thank you.
Pending felony firearm cases, if a school contacts us about an incident that happened at school, say a serious assault, and they would like to see a copy of the charging conditions or the conditions of release and the charging documents, we send those as well. But primarily, we send them out when it's a child with a firearm committing a felony out in the community. Again, for us, it seems, I don't know how you could make a comprehensive safety plan if you didn't understand what was happening with that child. And sometimes the information has, somewhat mundane, like who were the other kids they were with? Did this happen at 2 a.m.? Like it informs a lot in terms of what a safety plan can look like. Is there, oversight at home? What's happening? Is this child involved with other high-risk individuals? So again, we're really asking schools to take a look at that information, using it in a very holistic way to scoop that child back up, right? Don't push them out. That's not what we want. We want you to bring them back into the fold and help us figure out how to re-engage them and correct their behavior. For us, it's really important to be doing that. We recognize that, a child may be committed to a stay at a JR facility, at a juvenile rehabilitation facility, but they are always going to return to our community. And so again, as much as we can avoid that, as much as we can stabilize them in the community, we are going to have better outcomes. And I can say that, I really can say that I speak from that perspective. As a prosecutor and as a former public defender, I worked for 2 rotations in juvenile court as a public defender for about 15 years. So I've sat by the kids, I've talked to their parents, I've heard it from both sides. So it really, again, reinforced to me that as much can be done to support interventions in the community. That is what we need to do. Another aspect that we added to the Safer School Strategy and have really developed recently is our Extreme Risk Protection Order pilot project. Lisa has really helped in formulating this. The ERPO is a civil tool, and we have kind of used it as a way to engage families that are concerned about children involving with firearms. It allows us to coordinate with law enforcement, allows us to intervene, find out if there are weapons in the home, limit that access to weapons, and again, have some oversight with possible behavioral health interventions. An example of when we've used this ERPO tool in my cases, in terms of school safety, is if I have a school resource officer who contacts me about a child who is exhibiting pretty concerning behaviors and asks me, do you have any pending cases? Well, I look at my notes, I don't, but I do know, say this child is under investigation for some pretty serious cases with law enforcement. I have said to the SRO, the school resource officer, can I connect you with my ERPO team, with my ERPO DPAs to find out if that's a tool you want to pursue? Because right now, I don't have a case, and it sounds like you're pretty worried about what this child is doing in the community and what they might bring into the school district. So it's been pretty effective. Our ERPO team is very experienced, very seasoned, very timely, so they have been really great to work with. There are a number of school cases that I can recall from my memory where I was very appreciative to work with them and where the school districts were as well. With this specific pilot project, we've really worked on looking at individual cases that, again, involved a juvenile with a firearm and determining if it's appropriate to seek an ERPO, and then letting that team follow up where needed. So that has been an additional piece that we have developed in terms of our safer school strategy. And then the other update that I'm really excited to talk about. Again, we've had more district and statewide interventions. Douglas, next slide. One of the district interventions that we really worked on with our partners is our collaborative leadership addressing school safety. Our team is here. This is a tool that we have tested with a number of, I believe, about 7 school districts, and had workshops hosted by the executive's office where we have brought school districts in. We have had teams within these districts, so essentially you could have like a principal, you could have the district head of security, you could have a teacher, so kind of the whole gamut, a counselor of what that safety team would look like. And we offered them an opportunity to sort of audit their school safety plans with a pretty comprehensive framework to understand what's missing and what's not. So essentially it's kind of like a prioritization grid where you look at your school safety plan, you look at your resources, and then you find gaps and figure out how to prioritize filling those gaps. I, from my perspective, have found it incredibly helpful because, again, I have worked with a lot of different districts, and I think oftentimes you get directives from the state about what a model threat assessment will look like based on the law, but to implement that and to implement that with fidelity is very difficult. And it's also difficult for schools. I mean, again, we have to look at the audience of what a school was ultimately designed to be. It was not designed to be a threat assessment center. That was never supposed to be the purpose of a school. And as you know, we've seen the new challenges with schools and school safety. That's had to be a real area that they have had to develop. So to have a tool like this, which we are hoping to have available on a website, the toolkit will be available on a website through the executive's office pretty soon, is something that we want to offer to all of our school districts. And again, I invited the team here because it has very much been a collaborative effort. Susan really kind of envisioned this model, and then we have just really had a team supporting it. Just because there was a recognition that this wasn't, people needed this. This wasn't something that was available. There wasn't a way for them to understand what they had and what they didn't have and how to improve it in a real meaningful, smart, time-sensitive way. So again, this is a tool we're really excited to share. We asked the team to come in case anyone had any questions. We were hoping to see more schools engage and understand how to use this tool, and again, kind of support them in their safety planning with it. Does anyone need to add anything else? No. Okay, perfect. So again, I want to open it up to questions, see if anyone has any questions that we can answer. The thing I really like about our Safer School strategy is it's something that recognizes that resources are limited. Everyone has limited resources, limited time. It's something that we carved out into our practice because Lisa recognized how important it was. And it's something that Diana and I are pretty passionate about. We really think that it can change the composition of what juvenile court looks like for us. We think it can change the amount of kids that are coming into our system. Whenever anyone asks me, hey Jeannie, how do you solve juvenile gun violence? I just say, make sure the kids are going to school, right, Marcus? I mean, it's pretty simple in a way. Again, there's complexities to every problem, but I think that's always a start, and so that's what we're trying to start with and support as fully as possible.
I had a question for you about the origin. I think you mentioned Uvalde's kind of what made you to do this, but I'm also looking at the data, and it shows from 2021 to 2024, your numbers of juvenile crimes nearly tripled. So were you looking at the data too? How was that factored in, and do you have any reasons of why you think it did triple in that time frame from what you've seen trend-wise?
Well, I think one of the factors that we can look at is that during the pandemic, kids were not in school. We know that school is a protective factor, and that when schools are in session and kids feel supported in schools, they are less likely to get in trouble. We also saw between 2019 and 2024, while overall gun violence in King County is going down, we know that the number of school-age shooting victims has increased, and that's alarming. That's another reason why we are looking at how do we address gun violence with safer schools.
So you aren't saying that was an alarming trend that you're seeing, the numbers were big enough?
Yes.
I have a question for Jamie to clarify on the ERPO team, so they can make contact with students not in the system if an SRO reaches out and says they're concerned about this student.
Absolutely. So they can, they usually contact the SRO, some other law enforcement is often involved as well. And yes, it is something that we have recognized is important if we don't have a child necessarily with a charged crime. We have lots of concerning behaviors that happen at school. So again, a lot of it is sort of determining with a threat assessment if the alarming behaviors are sufficient, right, that you need an intervention. So, it's not uncommon for me to get a police report where, say, a child through Gaggle or some other screening mechanism, their journal entries on their Chromebook at school have written a detailed narrative story about how they want to, go through the school and shoot up the entire school, right? Again, a work of fiction, yes. Deeply concerning and troubling, yes. So those are cases that come. We review those police reports. We may not be able to file those charges, but we still reach out proactively to the school safety team. We ask them, what's going on? Do you have a threat assessment? What have you done? Have you talked to an ERPO team? Can we support that? What are you aware of in terms of firearms at the home? Are there any other interventions that can be done? So for us, again, it's really about sort of this comprehensive support. And whether or not the case is filed doesn't necessarily make a difference. If we can be involved and we can intervene, we will.
And with juvenile extreme risk protection orders, those protection orders are served on the parents. So it's an important way of looping parents into their children's behavior, engaging them in the process of how do we keep kids away from guns, how do we keep schools safe. The other thing about ERPOs is that they are civil in nature, so there's no criminal history, the records are sealed. It's really designed to reduce stigma to the young person and the family and to keep them out of the justice system, but to ensure that they do not have access to firearms.
Do you know how many families have been engaged through the ERPO pilot? And what happens if they refuse? Is that an option for them?
Well, the extreme risk protection order is signed by a judge, so it's a court order, and there are special trained law enforcement officers who serve the ERPOs and safely remove firearms from homes. It's a temporary removal, but the important part about juvenile ERPOs is that it's served on the parents.
And we are keeping data from the pilot project, so I believe it started in July, so those are data trends that we will be sharing. We're still sort of gathering all that data. I can say that Jimmy and I had a recent meeting with our ERPO team, and they just shared a number of cases that they had been involved with that had successfully, resulted in an intervention, the parent getting involved, maybe some sort of, court process where everyone's attention was sort of captured. I think that that's one of the other benefits of an ERPO. School threat assessment really needs a parent to be involved in order for it to be successful. You don't always, some parents are very involved, other parents aren't. You don't always have the same level of parent engagement. So again, if this is a tool that can kind of bring that family in and alert them to the severity and emergency of the situation, it can be very helpful.
In a non-punitive way. Right.
So this was a pilot project that we have launched in July, and it takes a while to get the word out. But we know that in August there were 3 referrals, and in September there were 15. So word is getting out.
I'm just wondering overall what the feedback is, because this is new, the way you're teaming up and working with the schools. What are these 20 districts telling you kind of, is it making a difference? Is it leading to interventions?
I mean, we've had really positive feedbacks from our school districts. Again, we now regularly receive emails where a school may say, hey, we have concerns about this student. Are they, do they have pending cases? Yes, here's their probation officer. We're able to sort of connect everyone. Again, if there are safety plans that need to be reinforced as a court-ordered condition, right, then it's not just a voluntary safety plan at school, then it's a court-ordered condition. We're able to do that, so we can share those pieces of information as well. We've received pretty good feedback. Diana is going to be presenting at a training for Seattle School District. We have some upcoming meetings scheduled with district SROs, and we are sitting on threat assessment boards for another district. Diana will be attending the Lake Washington School District threat assessment training. So frankly, I think they've been really appreciative and grateful. And similarly, we have felt the same way. We really want, again, the systems sort of to be connecting and supporting each other.
This is also a request that we have made as part of our King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office budget submittal. So we have asked for additional resources to continue this juvenile ERPO work. We have sought resources for one investigator threats assessment person, 2 law enforcement officers for the King County Sheriff's Office, and 1 deputy prosecuting attorney, because we have to have an attorney in court. Yeah.
Since you guys are really focusing on, potentially preventing a tragedy or keeping kids from reoffending, which is really hard to measure if that work is being done, how do you measure the success of this program, and what do you see as the biggest barriers moving forward?
One of the big barriers is resources. I have 2 ERPO deputies. So far, they have worked on 106 mostly adult petitions. This is something that we are doing, but we are not resourced to do the work necessary to protect every single school district in King County. That's why we have sought additional resources from the King County Executive and the King County Council. That's one challenge. I think one of the ways that we measure success is engagement. Do we have schools engaging with the prosecuting attorney's office? Do we have schools sharing information with us and with law enforcement? Do we have schools sharing information with families? Do we see families engaging in the lives of their young ones to ensure that guns are being removed from the homes? Are we seeing that there are fewer referrals of young people carrying firearms in our community? Those are all the types of markers that we'll be tracking in our community.
And 200 notifications the past 2 school years for pending felony firearms cases, is that still an alarming number to you? Is there?
I think all of the numbers are alarming. I think we know that when juveniles have access to firearms, when juveniles are carrying firearms, it's a dangerous situation. We know that they are impulsive. We know that they are highly susceptible to peer pressure. We know that the behavior in and of itself is dangerous. If you're carrying a firearm, you're also more likely to become a victim of firearm violence. All of those trends are alarming.
Any feedback from the attendance piece in terms of working with schools to try to get kids to go to school?
I mean, I think it's hard to measure. Again, the way attendance is managed in King County is going to change, most likely in terms of petitions and community engagement boards. We can only really, Diana and I can only really control what happens in court. But one of the things that we were just talking about it before we came in here, we were like, at every arraignment, we need to say, are you in school? And if so, why not? And that's something we've messaged to our team. Again, it's just like, if you're gonna ask me about conditions of release for a juvenile, are they in school, right? And if they're not, why aren't they, and what can we do to support it? So I think that we have communicated the urgency to our team. I see it reflected in, the efforts of probation now as well. It's something that we talk about even at the diversion level. So I think the messaging is getting out there. I do think that people are recognizing that children just need to be in school. It may be hard, there may be challenges, but school's kind of a microcosm of the world, right? The world is hard, so if you can't show up to school, how are you gonna show up through the rest of your life? And again, we wanna be as supportive as possible. We wanna look at non-traditional ways too, I think there's lots of different avenues for children to succeed, to receive education, to move forward in the world. But that's about them finding that motivation, and that's about them, being able to reach that goal. And again, that's what we wanna see happen.
And I also,
Go ahead.
I also want to give a shout out to the educators that I've worked with in my capacity as a prosecutor. We've had several cases where either juveniles have come to our office after having cases referred for making threats at school, getting into fights at school, or perhaps other criminal behavior in the community. And what I've seen is administrators and teachers really rise up to the occasion and go out of their way to make a connection with these particular vulnerable students, understanding that, again, there are needs that are not being met in this child's life for whatever reason, and really coming together as a multidisciplinary team to figure out how can we collectively support this youth to the best of our ability. Understanding resources and systems have limitations, and how can we engage families and parents to also do their part in collaborating and keeping an open mind with the schools regarding behavior interventions, again, ones that are not punitive, things that are positive and really motivate kids to reflect on their behavior and figure out how they can move forward with more socially acceptable and positive behaviors.
I was just about to do the same thing. We have highly dedicated educators in our community, and we are working really hard to coordinate, to be together, and to become the village that every child deserves.
Thank you so much.
So you have been watching live a press conference revealing the new Safer School strategy from the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. King 5's Natalie Swaby is there, and she will bring us the very latest with obviously a lot of context to keep our kids safe in schools. We'll also have reaction to this plan, so keep it here on King 5 Plus and King 5 News. For now, I'm Joyce Taylor. Have a great day.